Okay, this will be the last lecture for the Middle Ages unit. And so we're taking a look at the High Middle Ages, towns, manners, trade, plague, all that kind of good stuff that rhymes here. So, question is, what are the High Middle Ages? No jokes, please. Basically, it's the later Middle Ages, time from 1000 to 1500, the AD or the Common Era. And those who believe in the idea of Dark Ages, is basically when the Dark Ages get less dark. For those who believe that, basically things get more modern. We're getting to the end of the Crusades, ending around 1200, so a Third Crusade. Europe becomes a lot more open. There's a lot more travel. Before this, you might spend your entire life in a radius of less than 5 miles potentially. Now people are going to move around, do more things outside of where they live. A lot more trade, a lot more advancements, a lot more things happening as we move from the high Middle Ages to more of a modern type of Europe. And so we see what kind of life we're talking about here. And we have manor life versus town life. Let's first talk about kind of being on a manor or kind of being in the countryside. We already talked about the term serf before, okay? Serfs lived on a manor. Manor was run by a rich noble dude. On your As a serf, you were legally bound to the land. You had to stay there for a certain amount of time. You could not leave, and you honestly needed your lord's permission to do everything. You want to get married, had to have their permission. You want to go somewhere, have their permission. You want to do this, want to do that, want to build a shed, want to build a house, want to add on to your house, you get permission. I had to pay to use all the common land, common equipment like plows, grinding stones, horses, those kind of things, but you were protected on the manor. Free peasants could do a lot more now too. With the Crusades, a lot more peasants had their freedom because their lords died. They earned their freedom, and they could do a lot more now with new technologies. Something called the Karuka. Karuka was an iron plow. So on the video, that wooden plow kind of scratched the ground. They could make more iron now. It was able to a better plow to tilt the soil, and instead of using those oxen that won't listen or can't go very fast, they made horse collars. Horses going a lot faster. Because these things were so expensive, though, they basically designed a system where a bunch of people would share one big field, and you had these big, long strips of land, and you would share equipment, share supplies, all those kind of things. You may get to farm 3 or 4 strips of land of this field. In fact, in France, they do this very popular. When the French settled here in Wisconsin, along the Fox River, the land was even set up in long, narrow strips. When I used to work in Green Bay, I had an old map of Green Bay, and all the land was designed these long, narrow strips, just like they had in Europe in the 1400 in the late Middle Ages. Talent is very, very different. There's a new word comes in here called bourgeoisie. This one right here, bourgeoisie. Basically, the new middle class. We'll talk about this later on. Talk about communism too. It comes from the word Berg. Berg is the German word for wall, and a lot of times these cities had walls around them, like you see here. I guess it's a Minecraft city, doesn't matter. But it's these cities had walls around them, and so if you like Pittsburgh, so on and so forth, that's a German word for wall. These middle class people were artisans, merchants, those kind of things, where they would make stuff, trade stuff, basically not farmers. As a townsperson, you had a lot more rights. You had property. There's no military service. You could purchase your freedom if you were a serf. There were some serfs lived in towns, but towns had a downside too. They were dirty, smelly, overcrowded. Looking here, a lot of the houses were made out of wood, so you had candles and lamps, those kind of things. It would start fires. You burn the whole place down real easily. You're crammed in there really, really tight. Disease came by really, really easy. A lot of people got sick, especially talking about the plague. You have dirty water, cholera, bad diseases that could take place living in towns. But you weren't farming. You had your freedom. You had the walls protect you. If you had a walled city, things could be a little better for you. Trade became a big deal now too. Markets got bigger because of the Crusades down here. People wanted more and more goods to come back into Europe they had seen or had been exposed to in the Middle East. So we started having a lot of trade happen back and forth, especially with China. There had been overland trade with China for quite a while, but a famous Italian guy named Marco Polo went in the late 1200s. He did a trip to China, a trip back, and basically popularized his trip through a book that he wrote and passed out everywhere. Um, but new goods are coming in, silks, spices, all those kind of things are coming in, and becoming very, very popular trade. So people would move around, trade stuff city to city, instead of just staying on their own little farm and just sticking to themselves. Inside the cities, the artisans, the makers of stuff, they started these ideas of guilds. Guilds are kind of like a business association or like a union in a way. Basically, you have everybody that worked in one trade, whether you're a blacksmith or a coppersmith or a leather worker or a weaver or whatever. Okay, you'd be in a guild, and you'd all get together. You have rules about the kind of stuff you'd make, what standard it had to be, what quality it had to be. That way, everybody knew the stuff in that town was all going to be good. They also may set prices. That way, instead of two different weavers competing with each other, they're both going to make the same quality of stuff and set the same price, and will both be shopped from. Otherwise, you want to make sure that people aren't setting prices too low and selling cheap crap, or that they're not making cheap crap and making it so that people won't buy stuff from that city anymore. When you were working in a guild, a lot of times there was a process you had to go with to become a master of your trade. So you start as an apprentice, maybe starting out very very young, 7, 8, 9 years old. You go live with a master, say blacksmith. You learn, start doing little jobs, start doing bigger and better jobs, and eventually, when you can do stuff on your own, you become a journeyman. It means you go work for a master and get paid to buy an hourly wage or like a salary. Then eventually, when you can make your own masterpiece, you make the best thing you know how to make and make sure it's the best thing ever. You take it to all different masters, they check it out, and if they feel you're a good enough craftsman that you're making a master level piece, they will appoint you as a master and you get your own shop. This still works today too. You can be an apprentice plumber or a steam fitter, or those kind of things. This process still does work today in terms of some of the more skilled tasks that are out there. Universities also developing now too with the Crusades. They brought back a lot of knowledge, especially Aristotle and those kind of ideas we talked about last Tuesday or last Wednesday, excuse me. Um, you remember that Alexander the Great had his libraries in the Middle East, and so these knights got to expose a lot of the old Greek writings and Roman writings, and they brought some of this knowledge back. The thing is, the language in the universities was Latin, okay, and just like the church was. And the subjects they study would be like theology, study of religions, the arts like art, painting, or music, law, like being a lawyer, medicine, using like Greek guys like Hippocrates and Galen to how to treat medicine, or say something called the liberal arts. If you ever heard of a liberal arts college, you'll be doing things like math and geometry and astronomy, music, grammar, rhetoric, which means speaking. And these are the things you'd be learning in a university. We talked about Aristotle's logic and kind of how it was being taught by Thomas Aquinas. And one of the words for that was scholasticism. And that was kind of one of the words that they used for how they taught. And we looked at this painting before here, okay? Basically, we talked about this on Wednesday, combining the idea of faith, the idea of reason, and putting them together, explaining how Greek writings relate to the Bible. A lot of times in a class, though, you would not be just studying a class. It wouldn't be like history class or chemistry or English or whatever. You'd be studying a book. You may study a Greek writer like Socrates. You may study Aristotle. You may study Cicero. You may study a book of the Bible. You studied a book when you were in class, not necessarily a class or a subject. You earn degrees. You kind of see here's a degree back, the dress back then for a degree ceremony. Here's a dress for a degree now. Both are the exact same schools as Oxford, England, wearing the exact same thing we wore back then. But you work towards a bachelor's degree first. They call that in England and France. Typically took 4 years. You would become a master. That took 6 years, eventually to a doctorate, up to 12 years of study. Same exact thing today. I have a bachelor's degree. It took me about 4 years to get it. Eventually, I probably put another 2 years to study in and get my master's degree. And so the degree system was pretty much the same thing it was back then as well. Eventually, this thing develops called vernacular. Vernacular was a local language. Remember, academic language was Latin, but everyone else spoke something different. Germans speak German, England spoke English, French spoke French, so on and so forth. The vernacular was used for daily communication. The academic, the church language, that was Latin. There was some new entertainment, though, besides some games, those kind of things. It was troubadour poetry, so it would be like King Arthur and Robin Hood, those kind of things from. They would travel around, tell stories, epic poems about knights and ladies and love and all that kind of good stuff. They always told these poems in vernacular. And so it's kind of new ideas that came out that way in terms of this time as well. Now, one of the bad parts of this time was something called the plague. The plague was a bacteria. You could get a lot of different ways. There's bubonic plague, traveled through blood. There's pneumonic plague that traveled through the air. But basically, it was the worst disease the world has seen to this point. It was a disgusting little disease, too, okay? It would kill you within 7 days. So the first day, you may have a headache, feel kind of weak, kind of just have a cold kind of thing. Eventually, you get black spots on your skin. If you ever have the lymph nodes in your neck right here, or underneath your armpit, they get really swollen. Eventually, you get like these big, nasty blotches on your skin called buboles, and they're based on internal bleeding. Eventually, your nervous system collapses, and you die within 7 days. Once you knew you had the plague, there was very, 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 very little chance you had a chance to survive. Basically, we know that plague killed right around, give or take, 25 million people, or about half the population of Europe in the high Middle Ages, this Middle Ages time. How does it spread? We're pretty sure it's spread by fleas on rats. Fleas would drink the blood of rats, that kind of stuff. They carry the bacteria on them, and when rats died, they would jump off. Closest host would be people, and so the fleas would bite the people because bathing and stuff was not big yet in Europe at this time. You may go a couple weeks, month, etc., bath or jump in the river, and then fleas would bite the people. They get the disease, and that was all she wrote. The last outbreaks of plague were in the 1800s. There's an outbreak in 1906. The last known outbreak was in 1994, actually, of plague. Today, you can pump somebody full of antibiotics and kill the plague today. But back then, they didn't have that, so it was basically a death sentence. We have our spread. We see the first signs of plague over here in Constantinople. And this is actually a hits the Byzantine Empire very, very hard. And then eventually, through trade, we think these rats would hop on the ships. They go here to Italy, where all the trade was happening with the after the Crusades, and right along the main roads here, you'd see the plague go to big cities, Paris, London, up into Germany, and eventually finish off here up in the northern part of Europe. And so basically, follow all the trade routes. That's where the rats would go along with ships or wagons or whatever. Now, there's a big consequence to the plague. First off, everyone's dying, so nowhere around to work. And so the economic system basically collapses. Nobody can trade, those kind of things. Also, it's fear. People start freaking out, and we're going to talk next week about how different people reacted to the plague. Some found religion, some did other things. It wasn't very good. But because there are less people around to work now, the wages of people went up. It's like supply and demand. There's a smaller supply of people, so you have to pay them more to work. So now feudal lords had to pay people more to work on their land because there was less people around, and a lot of people got richer. They had to buy their own land because of that, and this kind of helped end feudalism even more. Also, there's less demand for food, so people started eating better that didn't get sick, and it was better in a lot of cases that way for people. Last thing I want to talk about here, real quick, just touch on very briefly, is something called the 100 Years' War, which in fact lasted for 111 years. Don't ask me why they don't call it the 111 Years' War. Beats the heck out of me. Anyway, it was a war between France and England. We'll see going forward here in history, France and England fight a lot. Up until 1850, they basically fight a whole bunch of wars with each other. And so start over land in France. England controlled part of France yet, remember, because the Norman kings were French. The French wanted the land that England controlled in France, and so they went to war. This war is basically revolutionary in changing warfare. Essentially, we had it where it first off started as knights fighting each other. France was all about the knight, where they would have their heavily armed knights on horseback go and charge and kill each other, that kind of stuff. But England used knights and a peasant army with longbows. And so they used big, huge longbows. You can see this picture down here. And they would fire volley after volley after volley after volley after volley of arrows into the French knights. And the longbow had enough power they could punch an arrow right through the French knight's armor. And in fact, when the French would capture English longbowmen, they would cut these two fingers off so they couldn't pull a bow back anymore. Their pointer finger and the middle finger. So if you hold those two fingers up in England, the pointer finger and middle finger is not exactly a very nice gesture to give people. The same thing as flipping the bird here. England had a very big advantage to start because of the longbow, but eventually France ended up winning the war. There's a great story of Joan of Arc. She's a peasant girl. She had been having visions since she was age 12, and supposedly the visions from God told her that she should lead the army and she'd win. She basically went to King Charles, who was king of France, said, "Let me lead the army." She leads them into a city called Orleans and wins the battle. Though she is captured and executed as a witch by the English because she was seeing visions and people didn't believe that. She was later sanctioned by the church. Eventually, France wins because they get this little thing called gunpowder. They use cannons, as you see down here, and those cannons are beat down the English and basically make knights no more. And so this kind of ends everything up until the Renaissance, where we're going to pick up with the first set of notes to do next Monday. Thank you very much, guys. Make sure this is done for Monday the 10th. I'll see you guys in class. Bye.